Alright, so today we'll be looking at the Islamic view of Jesus' crucifixion and death. First, let's watch a video from David Wood where he refutes Dr. Zakir Naik on his view of the crucifixion.
When Christians show up to a lecture by everyone's favorite fake debater, Zakir Naik, they often ask him about Jesus' crucifixion. And Zakir gives a pretty silly response. He says, for Muslims, the Quran is clear that Jesus wasn't killed and wasn't crucified. And for Christians, the Bible is clear that Jesus was crucified, but he survived crucifixion. And then he tries to show from the Bible that Jesus survived crucifixion. Why do I say that Zakir Naik's response is silly? Let me give you 10 reasons. First, every respected New Testament scholar and historical Jesus scholar on the planet, regardless of theological background, agrees that the Islamic view is wrong. Even non-Christian scholars agree completely with Christians on this point. For instance, the atheist New Testament scholar Geert Ludemann declares that Jesus' death as a consequence of crucifixion is indisputable. Marcus Borg of the notoriously liberal Jesus Seminar states that the most certain fact about the historical Jesus is his execution as a political rebel. Pinchas Lapid, a Jewish scholar, concludes that Jesus' death by crucifixion is historically certain. According to Paula Fredrickson, a convert to Judaism who specializes in historical Jesus studies, the single most solid fact about Jesus' life is his death. He was executed by the Roman prefect Pilate on or around Passover in the manner Rome reserved particularly for political insurrectionists, namely crucifixion. And since so many Muslims are becoming fans of Bart Ehrman because they think Ehrman agrees with them on anything, I should note that Ehrman writes, one of the most certain facts of history is that Jesus was crucified on orders of the Roman prefect of Judea, Pontius Pilate. As a general rule, when every expert in a field rejects your theory, probably time for a new theory. This means you, Zakir. Second, all of our early sources declare that Jesus died by crucifixion. Even the sources Zakir Naik quotes when he's trying to deceive his listeners plainly declare that Jesus died. For instance, Mark 15:37 says that Jesus breathed his last on the cross. He obviously didn't breathe his last if he went on living. Matthew 27:50 tells us that Jesus yielded up his spirit. Luke 23:46 reads, and Jesus, crying out with a loud voice, said, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. Having said this, he breathed his last. John 19:30 says that Jesus bowed his head and gave up his spirit. All of the books that Zakir Naik quotes to show that Jesus didn't die explicitly state that Jesus died. Fake experts like Zakir expose themselves as frauds when they tell their gullible followers that the Bible says the exact opposite of what it actually says. Welcome to the amazing world of Islamic apologetics, otherwise known as Opposite World. Third, while we're on the topic of sources, it's not just the New Testament that reports Jesus' death by crucifixion. There are Old Testament prophecies about his death. In Isaiah 53, for instance, the prophet Isaiah tells us about someone who would die for our sins and rise from the dead. In verses 5 through 8, Isaiah says this, but he was pierced for our transgressions, he was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. We all, like sheep, have gone astray. Each of us has turned to our own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before its shearers is silent, so he did not open his mouth. By oppression and judgment he was taken away. Yet who of his generation protested? For he was cut off from the land of the living. For the transgression of my people he was punished. Isaiah spoke these words about 7 centuries before Jesus walked the earth. Since Jesus is the only person in history who fits Isaiah's description, people like Zakir Naik are guilty of rejecting the testimony of Old Testament prophets. Fourth, Jesus predicted his own death in the same books that Zakir Naik quotes. In the Gospels, Jesus repeatedly says that he's going to die. Mark 9:31 says that Jesus was teaching his disciples and telling them, "The Son of Man is to be delivered into the hands of men, and they will kill him. And when he has been killed, he will rise 3 days later." Zakir Naik's favorite book to quote when he defends his delusional view of Jesus' crucifixion is the book of Matthew. But in Matthew 17:22-23, Jesus declares, "The Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men, and they will kill him, and he will be raised on the third day." Somehow, when fake debater Zakir Naik reads about Jesus saying that he's going to be killed, he thinks Jesus is saying that he's not going to be killed. I hope Zakir doesn't live the rest of his life like this. I mean, when he's walking down the street and he gets to an intersection and the sign says, "Don't walk," does he think to himself, "Don't walk, it must mean walk," and start walking across the intersection? That's how he reads the Gospels. Fifth, also in Zakir Naik's favorite book to quote when he's claiming that Jesus never died, an angel at the empty tomb of Jesus says that Jesus has risen from the dead. In Matthew 28:5-7, an angel says to a group of women who had come to visit Jesus' tomb, "Do not be afraid, for I know that you are looking for Jesus, who has been crucified. He is not here, for he has risen, just as he said. Come, see the place where he was lying. Go quickly and tell his disciples that he has risen from the dead." Oh, let me guess. When the angel says that Jesus has risen from the dead, he really means that Jesus never died, because angels always say the opposite of what they mean, according to the Zakir Naik method of scriptural interpretation. Sixth, Jesus' followers claimed that he had risen from the dead because he appeared to them after his crucifixion. But if Zakir Naik is right, and Jesus actually survived Roman crucifixion, he would have been so horribly mangled and disfigured that no one would ever have concluded that he had risen from the dead. Jesus wouldn't have been able to walk for months. His skin and his back muscles would have been torn to shreds. His wounds would have been badly infected. If Jesus had appeared to the apostles in that state, they would have been yelling for a doctor, not proclaiming his resurrection as the foundation of Christianity. Now, Zakir once studied medicine, so he should know this, unless, of course, he read his med school textbooks the same way he reads the Gospels, in which case, I'm glad he's not practicing medicine. Seventh, the traditional Islamic theory here is that Allah rescued Jesus by disguising someone else and having this other person crucified. The only appealing feature of this theory is that Jesus was rescued from harm. He wasn't crucified. The theory is flawed in every other conceivable way, but at least Jesus wasn't hurt. That's something. But Zakir Naik's theory doesn't even have that going for it. According to Zakir, the Romans tortured Jesus and nailed him to a cross, and Allah allowed it for no reason. Christianity teaches that Jesus suffered and died, but that there was a point to his suffering and death. What's the point of Jesus enduring suffering and crucifixion according to Zakir Naik? Allah rescues Jesus, but only after people lash him and nail him to a cross. Seems like the divine rescue came a little too late. Eighth, if Zakir's view is correct, then everyone in the first century completely misinterpreted what happened. Jews, Christians, and Romans were all convinced that Jesus died on the cross, and yet Allah did nothing to correct this view. Jesus did nothing to correct this view. So by miraculously taking Jesus away after the crucifixion, Allah was leaving everyone in a state of error and ensuring that future generations would believe that Jesus died by crucifixion. Since Jesus' death by crucifixion is foundational to Christianity, Allah helped start Christianity by misleading people about Jesus' death. No wonder Zakir feels so comfortable misleading people. He gets it from his God. Ninth, think about how inconsistent Muslim apologists have to be in terms of methodology. Zakir goes to the New Testament to support his claims, but then he ignores all the verses that refute his claims. So what's his method when he reads the Bible? Cherry pick the verses that you can use, ignore the verses that contradict what you're saying. Would he allow us to use this method with the Quran? Suppose someone quotes Surah 9, verse 5 of the Quran, "Slay the infidels wherever you find them." What's Zakir Naik going to say? Oh, you have to look at the context of Surah 9. You have to look at the surrounding verses. You have to look at other verses in the Quran. You have to look at the historical situation. Guess what? I agree completely. These are basic rules of interpreting a text. But when Muslims go to the Bible, they throw out the most basic rules of scriptural interpretation. Why? Because they have to. An incoherent position can only be defended with an inconsistent methodology. Surprise, surprise, Islam's top apologists are thoroughly inconsistent. 10th, even if we throw reason and logic and facts and scholarship out the window and believe all the ridiculous things Zakir Naik tells us, Islam still turns out to be false. The point of bringing up the crucifixion is to show that the Quran is wrong when it claims that Jesus wasn't crucified. But even if we believe everything Zakir says about Jesus' crucifixion, we still have to conclude that the Quran is wrong. If Jesus was nailed to a cross, but somehow survived, the Quran is wrong when it says that Jesus wasn't crucified. Hence, Christians can listen to Zakir's entire presentations and reply, "Thank you, Dr. Naik, for proving that Muhammad was a false prophet." So, even after Zakir Naik goes against every respected historical Jesus scholar and New Testament scholar in the world, even after he goes against all of the first century sources that he quotes to defend his position, even after he goes against Old Testament prophecies about Jesus' death, even after he goes against Jesus himself, since Jesus repeatedly told his followers that he was going to die by crucifixion, even after he goes against the angel who said that Jesus had died by crucifixion, even after he ignores the fact that if Jesus had somehow survived crucifixion, the disciples never would have concluded anything about resurrection because he would have been badly in need of medical attention, even after he insists that Jesus suffered pointlessly, even after he portrays God as a cosmic trickster who misled people by miraculously sustaining Jesus and then taking him away, knowing that everyone was convinced that he had died on the cross, even after he displays his utter inconsistency by using a method of interpreting the Bible that he would never apply to the Quran, even after all of this, Islam still turns out to be false. No wonder Zakir has been running from Christian debaters his entire career. If this man ever steps on stage with an experienced Christian debater, just one, it's game over for him and for his gullible followers. So, Dr. Naik, have fun hiding in Malaysia.
So, as you can see, Dr. Zakir Naik's view of the crucifixion is absurd and completely crumbles when scrutinized or criticized. Moving on, let's go to Shabir Ali, who will explain the most popular and classical Muslim understanding of Jesus' crucifixion, which is found in Quran chapter 4, verse 157 to 158.
The verse, though, that you might be thinking of when you said that there is a verse is the one in Surah An-Nisa, the 4th chapter of the Quran, where it says that they said we killed Jesus, the Messiah, the messenger of God. And then the Quran follows up by saying, وَمَا قَتَلُوهُ وَمَا صَلَبُوهُ وَلَكِنْ شُبِّهَ لَهُمْ, whereas they killed him not, nor did they crucify him, but so it was made to appear to them.
Mm-hmm. This is a common verse that many Muslims quote.
Yes, and based on this verse, Muslims will commonly say that Jesus was not crucified, and by that they would mean that Jesus was not even put on the cross. So what are we to make of this whole gospel account that somebody was there on the cross and crucified under Roman authority, and that person was Jesus? Well, the Muslim commentators on the Quran generally say, with reference to this verse, that what actually happened was that Jesus was taken up alive into heaven before he was even arrested. And that's generally how the story is told. And someone else was made to look like Jesus, and this someone else was put on the cross.
Okay.
And so everyone was convinced that Jesus was on the cross, whereas in fact by this time Jesus was in heaven.
So who holds this point of view?
This is generally held by Muslims at large, because it is described like this in the Muslim commentaries on the Quran.
Okay, so as you can see, Shabir Ali says that the majority of Muslims and Muslim scholars hold to the view that Jesus was not crucified and Jesus was not put on the cross. Instead, he was alive when he was taken up into heaven before his arrest, and someone else was made to look like Jesus, and that person was put on the cross. Now let's see how Christian apologist Dr. William Lane Craig responds to the Islamic belief that the crucifixion did not happen, and how it is flat out a historically false view.
Yes, I'm wondering if you could respond to the Muslim belief that Jesus actually wasn't crucified at all, that
Yes.
God made it appear to be the case, and therefore his resurrection appearances would not actually be resurrection appearances.
Yes. In my dialogue with Muslim theologians, when I've had events on university campuses with them, this is one of the points that I press them very hard on. Because the crucifixion of Jesus is, in the words of Robert Funk, the founder of the Jesus Seminar, the one indisputable fact about Jesus of Nazareth that everybody recognizes. And so I find it ironic that of all the facts that the Quran or that Muhammad would have denied about Jesus would be the one indisputable fact that everybody recognizes about Jesus of Nazareth, namely that he was executed by crucifixion. And the reasons for that is that we have a multitude of sources, independent sources in the New Testament that attest to this. We have extra biblical sources in Tacitus and Josephus that attest to this. Also, it passes the criterion of embarrassment. That is to say, it is something that the early church would never have invented for its would-be Messiah, had it not in fact been true. It was something the early church had to overcome rather than invent. So there are very, very good grounds historically for believing that Jesus was executed by Roman crucifixion. And yet the Quran denies this without a shred of historical ground for doing so. The Quran was written by a man 600 years after the event who had no independent source of historical information about Jesus of Nazareth, who simply received and codified in the Quran tales of Jesus that were found in the apocryphal Gospels, like the infancy Gospel of Thomas, as well as in the New Testament, or that were just circulated in the Arabian Peninsula. And so the Quran contains at its heart an egregious historical error, namely that Jesus of Nazareth was not crucified. And in my debates with Muslim theologians on this, perhaps the most interesting response that I've received so far was the claim by Shabir Ali, who is a Canadian Muslim apologist. He is willing to agree that Jesus was in fact crucified, which really compromises the Quran, because the Quran says they did not crucify him. But Ali is willing to grant that he was crucified, but he says he wasn't actually killed. Ali subscribes to the apparent death theory, and he thinks that they took him down alive from the cross, placed him in the tomb, and before he could die in the tomb, Allah assumed him into heaven. So he will go, like 90% of the way toward the Christian view, but then at the last minute, he has this sort of body-snatching view of Jesus where God takes him away.
Alright, now let's take a look at how Shabir Ali explains his view of the crucifixion that William Lane Craig just mentioned.
So based on this understanding, then, what do you think happened to Jesus, then?
Well,
If we follow your line of logic.
One cannot say for absolutely sure what happened to Jesus, because this is a historical question. But as a theological matter, trying to interpret the Quran, I would say that when the Quran says that they did not crucify Jesus, it simply means that they did not succeed in their plan of killing Jesus by this method of execution. They thought they had finished the job, but in fact they had not.
So, Shabir Ali's view on the crucifixion is that Jesus was crucified, but they did not succeed in killing him. Now let's go back to William Lane Craig, who will show how this view of the crucifixion also fails.
I pointed out to Shabir in the debate that what this means is that Allah then deceived 1/3 of the world's population by foisting Christianity upon the world, by snatching away the body of Jesus so the disciples would find the empty tomb, see these appearances and think he's risen from the dead, and thereby Allah's deceived most of the world into believing in Christianity, which is surely implausible. And he didn't have a good response to that. So I think this is a really major problem for the Quran, is its historical portrait of Jesus is so fundamentally at its heart inaccurate.
So, as you can see, no matter how Muslims try to explain away the historical error of Quran chapter 4 verse 157 to 158, it ultimately means that
Allah then deceived 1/3 of the world's population by foisting Christianity upon the world.
Well, that's it for today, guys. You can feel free to download this video, upload it to your monetized channels, and use it however you want. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one.